In this world, power is the only thing that actually counts as justice, and demons spent forever killing each other just to prove who was strongest. But 520 years ago, everything changed when a new king unified the world, and everyone learned the name of the strongest demon lord ever, Hyram. 20 years after taking over, Hyram decides to confront the demon god, and the god asks why he's ignoring the divine orders he was given. The god wanted 100 human sacrifices a day, but Hyram hated that idea. He tells the god the world belongs to the living and to stay in his own lane. The god loses it, calling him arrogant and a fool for defying heaven, so he sentences Hyram to death as his divine power blasts across the entire land. Right as things get heated, the demon god's spirit actually takes a physical form. He's massive, and he looks down at Hyram, yelling that a basic demon like him needs to be put in his place. Hyram just smirks right back and says an annoying god who comes down to earth is the one who needs a reality check. It's finally the strongest king versus the demon god. Their powers clash so hard it's like a miracle. And while the god is screaming and attacking, Hyram just charges up a huge blast of energy. Talk about a main character moment. The fight goes on for 3 days and 3 nights, absolutely wrecking the mountains around them, and it ends with the demon god getting turned to ash, a pretty embarrassing loss for a divine being. Hyram tells him he lost the second he took a physical form because now he has to follow the rules of this world. Even as he's fading away, the god's voice keeps calling the king of demons a fool, and he gives one last warning saying a demon can never actually win against the god who rules them. Hyram asks if beating him isn't proof enough that he's already escaped the rules, but the god says as long as he's a demon, he's trapped. The god tells Hyram that his defeat was actually decided the very second he was born as a demon. It's just how the world works, and Hyram asks what the guy is even talking about, so the god tells him to be proud of how far he got before he welcomes death. A massive dark portal opens up beneath them as the god officially calls for Hyram's end. Suddenly, reality starts to crack, and Hyram looks down in total shock as his own hands begin to crumble into pieces of rock. He yells out to the god asking what he did to him. Honestly, losing your hands to some magic trick is a rough way to go, and the god explains he never thought he'd have to use divine punishment on someone from this world, while Hyram just repeats the words. The god says he's being literal because, as the ruler of all demons, he's the one who actually decides if Hyram lives or dies. He stands over the Breaking King, calling him a fool one last time as Hyram's body continues to fall apart into nothing. Hyram curses his luck as his face finally shatters, and he realizes this might actually be the end for the strongest demon king. A massive pillar of light slams into the earth, blowing everything apart and leaving nothing but a giant crater in the wasteland. The dust settles, leaving a single massive blade standing alone in the middle of the cracked and broken ground. It's a total ghost town, and a little demon girl named Eru leans against the stone, looking completely drained as she clutches a small charm in her shaking hands. She reaches out for the pile of clothes left behind, but they just crumble into ash between her fingers. She can't even believe what's happening. Her eyes fill with tears as she calls out for Hyram, realizing that her king is actually gone for good. Eru just loses it, screaming at the top of her lungs while she holds onto the last bit of fabric like her life depends on it. Talk about a bad day. And far away in a pitch-black room, a mysterious white stone starts to glow with a strange light as a magic circle suddenly spreads across the floor. The magic circle expands even more until a tiny baby is born right in the center of the light, slowly opening its eyes for the first time. Months pass since the fall of the great demon king, and the world has moved on, but way across the sea, there's a hidden land, and inside a massive, dark temple sits that same 12-sided stone, covered in ancient runes and waiting for something to happen. The newborn baby lets out a tiny cry as it takes its very first breath in this new world. Hyram realizes his reincarnation actually worked. He's a baby now, but he knows exactly who he is, and he remembers preparing the ritual before his big fight with the demon god, just in case things went south. Even though he planned to win, he knew fighting a god was risky, so he made sure he had a backup plan for defeat. He explains how reincarnation works. You keep your soul, your mind, and even your magic circuits since they're tied together. Basically, only the body is brand new, but that tiny baby brain isn't exactly built to handle a demon king's thoughts. The mental strain is causing total chaos inside him. At this rate, he's going to starve to death as a helpless infant. He decides to use growth magic to age his body up instantly. Talk about a crazy speedrun for growing up. And forcing his body to grow that fast is incredibly painful, like his entire biology is being ripped apart. Hyram collapses on the floor as a grown man, feeling like every single bone just broke. He definitely underestimated that pain. Hyram looks over the secret room he built for his rebirth, glad he left some fresh clothes and magical locks behind. He wonders how long he's been out since he originally set the reincarnation timer for exactly 10 years. And as he walks toward the exit, he starts worrying that such a complex spell might not have been perfectly timed. He sees his seals are still holding strong, so he gets ready to see what the world has been up to, but his jaw hits the floor when he checks the date and realizes he's actually 500 years late to the party. And he figures out that forcing his soul to swap races from demon to human totally fried the math on his spell. He only did it because the demon god's power would have just killed him again if he stayed a demon. So he chose humans despite them being the weakest race with zero protection and really short lifespans. But without divine mana to keep them young, most humans just die of old age before they can ever get strong. However, humans have the highest potential, and Hyram is ready to use his veteran experience to become unstoppable. Hyram vows to become crazy strong in this new life, and he realizes that even though he has no proof, the lack of horns means he definitely succeeded in becoming a human. He checks out his hands, wondering if this is what a human body actually feels like. It feels different, but he likes it, and now he's itching to test out just how much power he's packing. A 5-century wait didn't change a thing. His mission is still the same as it's always been, and with the image of his old enemy behind him, he swears that he's going to kill the demon god. Suddenly, he notices someone is actually breaking his seal from the outside. Someone's trying to get in. Light floods the dark room and Hyram looks up, completely caught off guard by the long hair blowing in the wind. An elf girl carrying a sword pushes the door open, looking just as shocked to find him there. She yells at him and asks what he's even doing in a place like this. She clearly wasn't expecting a guest. The elf girl warns Hyram that a dangerous dragon is sleeping on the mountain peak, and if he stays here, he's definitely going to die. Hyram looks a bit surprised by the sudden warning, so he asks who she is and introduces himself. The girl says her name is Lumiel and explains that she's actually come here to defeat that dragon. Lumiel starts walking away while acting a bit flustered. She's clearly in a rush to get moving. And after saying she understands the situation, she yells out Hyram's name to catch his attention one last time. She explains she has urgent business before the fight and asks if he can get down the mountain safely without an escort. Hyram looks her right in the eye. He's the strongest demon lord ever, so he tells her he'll be just fine on his own. Lumiel runs off while screaming for him to stay away from the peak, promising to come back for him later, and Hyram just waves her off, telling her not to worry. He thinks she's a bit too loud for her own good. Once she's gone, he gets a wicked look on his face. He's actually pretty interested in this dragon she mentioned. Hyram looks up at the massive mountain peak and thinks about the ancient dragon he just heard about. He starts heading up the trail, his boots crunching on the leaves as he moves deeper into the woods, and he can really feel a crazy amount of magic power coming from the top. It's definitely a strong ancient dragon. Hyram just smirks and thinks this is actually pretty convenient for him. He reaches a dark cave and figures that since he's still getting used to his magic, a real fight is the best way to train. So he walks right into the dragon's den and casually says excuse me to the giant monster waiting inside. The guy has zero chill and straight up challenges the dragon to a contest of strength, even if he doesn't know its name. The dragon lets loose a massive blast of energy, but Hyram just puts up a shield and takes it head-on, and as the beast roars, Hyram just grins and tells the monster that it's actually got some pretty good movement. The dragon fires another huge breath attack that fills the cave, but Hyram just dodges it and jumps onto its head. Hyram focuses as he tests out his powers, realizing his current body magic is even better than what he had in his past life. He stands right on the dragon's nose as magic explodes everywhere. He's honestly glad he picked the human race this time, and the dragon looks completely furious. It opens its mouth wide to swallow him whole, but Hyram just stands there like it's nothing. He asks if the beast wants another round and readies a magic circle, then a massive pillar of energy slams down, and the dragon's head gets pinned to the floor with a heavy thud. It looks totally shocked that a human is this strong. The dragon gives up and admits defeat, telling Hyram he can go ahead and cook or boil it if he wants. Hyram tells the beast to lift its head and stop acting so dramatic. He's just surprised it can actually speak his language. The dragon looks at him and explains that speaking is a normal thing for an ancient dragon like itself. Hyram notices its voice is kind of soft and asks if it's still just a kid. The dragon replies that it's only 600, so Hyram tells it that it's pretty strong for a youngster. The dragon offers up its treasure, but Hyram doesn't even want it. The dragon gives up and says it's fine if he wants its body, telling him to just finish it off and take its scales and fangs. And Hyram looks at the beast and thinks it's actually pretty brave. He's always like that in people, so he decides to be chill with it. He asks the ancient dragon what its name is. The creature looks a bit confused by the question at first, but then it stands tall and introduces itself as Jorm, the scorching flame dragon. Hyram asks if it got those names from winning a big fight in the past, noting that 2 names at 600 is a huge flex, and the dragon admits that's exactly what happened. It's honestly surprised that a human knows so much about how dragon names work. Now that it's shared its own title, the dragon asks Hyram what his name is. Hyram gives a little smirk and tells the beast his name is Hyram, just casually dropping it like it's no big deal. The dragon completely loses it and asks if he's actually the legendary demon lord who killed the demon god. Hyram just leans back and confirms he's that guy. Dude's out here scaring dragons just by saying his name. Jorm is piecing things together and asks if this kid is really the reincarnated body of the guy who fought the demon god, and he notes that coming back to life is a legendary move, but it fits Hyram. Hyram just sits there and asks how the dragon even knows him. Jorm explains that Hyram is a legend for being the first person to ever go toe-to-toe with a god. Turns out the dragons were the ones who gave him his god killer title. Looking at the kid, Jorm finally realizes why his father ordered him to live in this specific spot. Hyram finds it interesting that the dragon is just following orders and asks exactly how long he's been stuck here. Jorm says it's been about 500 years of him staying close to his father. He adds that Hyram really does look like the old legend. Hyram asks if they actually met in his previous life, but Jorm just asks if he remembers the name Jormungand. The name definitely rings a bell, and Hyram confirms that he still remembers it clearly. Jorm smiles and explains that Jormungand was his father's name back when Jorm was just a little guy. He used to see the demon lord all the time. Hyram thinks back to the old days when the dragon king Jormungand became his servant. Dude was easily the strongest beast he ever beat. It's a small world when you're a legendary demon king. Hyram looks back and remembers that Jormungand was way more than just a servant. He was a close friend and a wise advisor. The old dragon had seen thousands of years of history, so Hyram used to go to him for help all the time. Seeing Jorm here now, he realizes the old dragon must have told his son to guard this place for him, and it finally hits him that Jormungand was the one who suggested he should come back as a human. Jorm just watches his master piece it together, and in a flashback, the massive dragon tells Hyram that if he loses to the demon god, he has to choose to be born as a human next time. Back then, Hyram wasn't really feeling the idea because he thought the whole plan was way too risky. Switching races isn't exactly easy. He knew that reincarnation magic is already super likely to fail, and trying to change your race makes those odds even worse. Because of that, he stayed a demon during his first try. But after the divine punishment took him out, he finally used Jormungand's advice and swapped his magic to become human. Hyram mentions how everyone calls him the demon god killer now, but he laughs it off since he's the one who actually died. Dude's really humble about his own legend. Jorm clarifies that while Hyram died first, the fight didn't exactly end well for the other guy either. Hyram asks him what he means by that, so Jorm explains that the backlash from the demon god's own attack completely trashed his body and almost killed his soul too. Hyram is totally floored by the news. He says he's never heard this version of the story and tells Jorm to keep talking. Jorm explains that the divine judgment attack is basically the god slamming his own soul into a target, which is super dangerous. And Hyram starts putting the pieces together. He asks if that means the demon god could even use a move like that against a human. Jorm says there's no way, since a human doesn't have a collar or a god's blessing, the attack wouldn't even touch them. Jorm reveals that after the big fight, the demon god was so messed up he had to hide inside a cocoon, and because his very existence was falling apart, he couldn't even make it back to the god's realm. Because of that, Hyram realizes the big bad is actually hiding somewhere in this world. Dude's just waiting around somewhere. Hyram thanks the dragon for the info since it's exactly what he needed to hear, and Jorm just tells him it's no problem. Things get a bit quiet. Hyram looks up at the massive dragon and asks what he's planning to do now, and Jorm says he's honored to be taken out by the legend who fought a god. He's just glad Hyram was his last fight. Hyram looks Jorm right in the eye and tells him he wasn't kidding earlier. The dragon really is strong, and Jorm takes the compliment, asking Hyram to tell his father he went out like a warrior before offering up his body to be finished off. Hyram doesn't miss a beat and confirms that he definitely wants the dragon for himself, but instead of a killing blow, he holds out his hand and tells Jorm to serve him. Talk about a plot twist. Hyram gets this intense look and says the dragon is going to help him take over the entire world. Jorm is completely caught off guard and just repeats the word conquer with a confused look on his face. Hyram just laughs and says this time is different. He's not just going to kill the demon god, he's taking the whole world back, and Jorm asks if he's actually being serious right now, but Hyram just smirks and tells him he's not the type to lie about something that big. The dragon is totally sold and swears on his life and honor to serve Hyram as his new king. Jorm's massive body starts to glow as he officially pledges to follow his majesty wherever he goes. Jorm finishes his transformation and shrinks down into a tiny, cute dragon that looks nothing like the beast from before. Hyram lets the little guy sit on his shoulder and tells him he's pretty impressed with his skills. So Jorm starts bragging about being the best of the best, and he looks up with those big eyes, asking his new boss what their first move is going to be. Hyram thinks it over and says there's nothing to do yet, since they can't really start the war until they find out where the demon god is hiding. Jorm suddenly remembers something and tells Hyram he's more than welcome to take all the treasure hidden in the cave. Hyram is actually surprised and asks if he's sure, because everyone knows dragons usually obsess over their piles of gold. But Jorm explains he doesn't really care about money, and that most of the loot here is just Hyram's own legacy from back in the day. He even told his dad where the rest was hidden. The two of them walk deeper into the cave, where massive hills of gold coins and treasure chests are just sitting there under the light. Hyram asks if Jorm really gathered all this stuff by himself, but the dragon says the actual cool stuff he collected is over in another corner. The little dragon hops over to a pile of old armor and weapons, flexing about how great his collection is, especially this one piece he found. Hyram looks at the pile of weird, shiny junk and realizes that Jorm has some pretty specific tastes, but looking at the massive hills of gold and the crown on the floor, he asks if all this other stuff belonged to the Dragon King. Jorm explains that his father left the hoard here and told him that one day something cool would happen. Then he'd finally get why they needed all this treasure. And as the little dragon flies around, he realizes meeting the king was that big moment. Meanwhile, Hyram realizes his old general left Jorm here to guard his secret hideout. Hyram leans back and wonders where Jormungand is hiding these days, but he's pretty sure they'll cross paths again eventually. Suddenly, Jorm flies over with a necklace in his mouth, yelling for the king to look because his dad told him this was the most important item in the cave. The moment Hyram sees the glowing pendant, he completely freezes up. He definitely recognizes this thing, and he tells the little dragon he needs to see it right now, so Jorm just shrugs and hands it over. Hyram looks at it and explains he gave this charm to his adopted daughter, Vilvi. Back in the day, talk about a small world. He used to carry it everywhere because it's actually a magic tracker he made that way he could always find Vilvi if she wandered off. Hyram holds up the glowing stone and explains that it changes color based on how much mana someone has, so he thinks back to Vilvi, his demon daughter with insane talent. Since people with huge magic live forever, she's probably still out there. The stone starts glowing blue, which proves she's definitely alive, though Hyram is confused why her exact location is so blurry. He asks if Jormungand ever mentioned the girl, but Jorm says his dad never said a single thing about her, and Hyram just looks down for a moment and says he gets it. He's definitely in his feelings right now. Jorm notices the vibe and asks if the king is feeling sad, while Hyram just stands there in silence. He tells the little dragon he's actually fine, just knowing she's alive somewhere is enough for him right now, and then he gets that spark back in his eyes and decides they're going to find both Vilvi and the demon god. Jorm is totally down for the mission and yells out to show he's ready. The little guy has way too much energy. The dragon says he's going to give it everything he's got, so Hyram smiles and tells him he's counting on him. Inside the hoard, Hyram finds a magic tool called a magic bag. It's a crazy item that holds way more than its size suggests. And the best part is the weight never changes no matter how much gold and gear you stuff inside. Hyram packs up every bit of treasure Jormungand left behind, and the two of them finally leave the empty cave. They stand at the edge of a massive cliff, looking out over the clouds as the sun starts to rise over the world, and Hyram tells Jorm it's time to move out, which gets the little dragon hyped enough to yell back at him. Meanwhile, a massive orc is trying to smash Lumiel into the dirt. She barely dodges the strike as it craters the ground, but her luck runs out when her sword snaps in half. Now she's just standing there defenseless while the monster stands over her. Back in the forest, Jorm mentions that if they keep following the path they're on, they'll reach a human village soon. Hyram looks interested and asks the little guy if he knows who actually rules this part of the land these days. Jorm explains that everything went to hell and wars started after Hyram died, but then he catches a scent and yells out. Hyram spots a massive figure standing in the middle of the road and asks if that's just a normal orc, but it's way too big to be a regular one. Jorm explains that the beast is actually an orc lord. Jorm finds it weird that an orc would just stand around like that, so Hyram suggests they keep their distance and stay hidden while they pass, but suddenly someone rushes past them, catching Hyram completely off guard. It's the blonde elf girl from the mountain, and she yells out that her name is Lumiel Ortville. She stands her ground against the giant monster, telling the orc lord that she's going to take its life as part of her duty. Hyram realizes it's the same girl from before, making Jorm freak out and ask how he could possibly know her. Dude's acting like he's caught him in a lie. Hyram explains they met at his sealed chamber where she claimed she was there to kill him, which actually impresses Jorm. Lumiel starts trading blows with the monster, and while Jorm thinks she's just a beginner hero, Hyram notices she's actually pretty good with a sword. Hyram finally figures out how she broke his ancient seal, but Jorm thinks they should just kill her now before she becomes a real problem later. Lumiel swings her blade with everything she's got, but it just shatters against the monster's skin, and she can't believe her treasured sword just broke. while Hyram thinks it was pretty obvious that would happen. Jorm wonders if the girl got scammed into buying that junk, and Hyram just calls her a clueless hero. Even though she's an elf, she doesn't use magic and keeps trying to fight with a broken hilt. The Orc Lord prepares a massive counterattack, and Hyram realizes she really is acting like a typical hero. He explains to Jorm that heroes actually can't use normal magic, but they have special inherent magic instead. The problem is that Lumiel clearly has no idea she's a hero, let alone how to use her real power. So with the monster closing in to finish her off, Hyram decides it's finally time to go save the rookie. Out of nowhere, Hyram steps right between the monster and Lumiel dudes just standing there smiling like it's a joke. He gives a smug look and then punches right through the Orc Lord's chest, showing her how it's actually done. Hyram clenches his fist with insane strength, and then he just blows the Orc Lord apart. The massive monster doesn't stand a chance against that kind of power. He tells Lumiel that if she can't use magic, she needs a better sword because her last one was total junk. Lumiel is completely stunned by his strength and just says it was amazing. So she thanks him and says he must train like crazy for a human dude's just acting casual about being a literal legend. She tells him he saved her life and she owes him big time. And then Hyram asks her to teach him about the kingdom and how things work now since he's lived on the mountain forever. Lumiel says she's happy to help, but Hyram suddenly stops when he hears something moving in the trees. A huge pack of angry orcs comes out of the woods to surround them, and Hyram asks if she did something to piss them off, but she says she has no idea why they're so mad. Lumiel explains she was actually on her way to handle the dragon when some merchants called her for help, and she's really worried about them because an orc lord was blocking their only way out. Hyram tells her she needs to go protect those people right now while he handles the mess here. But since she doesn't have a weapon, he hands over his own sword so she actually has a chance. He tells her not to stress since she already saw him wreck that Orc Lord earlier. Dude's basically a cheat code. Lumiel realizes he's right and thanks him before heading off to find the merchant. As she runs off, Hyram apologizes to Jorm for giving away the dragon's sword without asking first, and Jorm says it's cool since he already gave Hyram all his loot anyway, right as a massive pack of orcs charges them. Hyram starts counting the enemies like it's a game, and Jorm's just confused while Hyram builds up a ball of light. He prepares to fire off a basic magic bullet, which is probably going to be way more overkill than it sounds. Jorm is shocked that Hyram is using basic magic against an army, and while the orcs charge, Hyram just keeps building up his energy. Hyram lets out a massive 100-shot attack that fills the entire sky. The beams shred the army, and Hyram just grins at the massive explosion. Jorm says that was incredible, but Hyram just brushes it off. He thinks that's exactly why it's only called basic magic. Since the orcs are gone, Hyram says they should find Lumiel, and he admits he needs her alive just to get some info. Lumiel stands in front of the merchants to keep them safe from the monsters. She swings her new sword and cuts through the first monster like it's nothing. She moves fast and clears the group. She's carrying these guys way too hard. Suddenly, Lumiel looks back in shock and asks why she's got an arrow sticking right out of her back. The merchants she saved are just walking away, and she collapses onto her sword. She can't believe they betrayed her. The merchant laughs about how stupid Lumiel is for not realizing she was being tricked, and his buddy says they should just finish this and get moving. One guy notices her sword is worth a ton of money, so they decide to steal it since she'll just be orc food anyway. And looking at her on the ground, one of the guys says it's a waste to just leave her, suggesting they take advantage of her first. The others agree, saying they've always wanted to do whatever they wanted with an elf. These guys are actually the worst. Lumiel is barely holding on as she asks them why they'd do this to her, but the leader just looks back with a gross face and repeats her question. He pulls a knife and tells her it's obviously for the money, but he also just really loves doing this kind of thing, and he gets a huge kick out of watching someone who's had it easy finally fall into total despair. He mocks her while she's crying, asking how it feels to be shamed by the very people she put her life on the line to protect. He keeps making fun of her by calling her a princess while she just lies there completely broken. Hyram steps in and stands over Lumiel. He tells the group that they've done quite enough, and the bandits are totally caught off guard. They scream out, demanding to know who the hell he even is. Hyram just keeps walking forward with Jorm on his shoulder. He casually tells them he's just a human passing by. The leader thinks he's scored big and says a young guy like him will sell for a high price as a slave. His crew laughs about how smart the boss is, but Hyram shuts him up with a massive punch to the face. The leader gets sent flying, the rest of the guys lose it and yell at Hyram for what he just did. They all pull their knives and rush him at once. Dude's basically about to take out the trash. Meanwhile, Lumiel is still curled up on the ground. She's shaking and can't even process what's happening, but Hyram leans down and calls her name. He asks her very gently if she's okay, and she looks up with tears in her eyes. She can barely believe it's really Hyram standing there. Hyram smiles and tells Lumiel she's safe now. He tells her not to worry and puts his hand on her head to start healing her. A huge burst of light wraps around Lumil as Hyram fixes her up. Lumil gives a small smile and thanks him. She says she's feeling a lot better, but the healing might be a bit much. Lumil suddenly passes out, and Hyram wonders if his magic was too strong. Jorm laughs because he used to be terrible at healing. Hyram decides it's time to move on. He tells Jorm they need to finish up with these losers before they head into town. He pins the leader down and loots him while the guy screams. The bandit can't believe a human would choose an elf over him. Hyram mocks the guy for talking about friendship when he was going to sell him. Then he finds something weird in the bag. He pulls out a creepy skull jar. It's a special magic tool used specifically for calling orcs to a location. He also finds a different tool that keeps monsters away. This explains how the bandits didn't get eaten themselves. It finally clicks for Hyram. He realizes these guys were using the tools to lure orcs toward people while staying safe. Hyram realizes the entire orc attack was a setup designed to take Lumil out, and it's pretty clear those merchants are fakes helping with the trap. It doesn't make sense for an orc lord to just hang out on a road, especially when they suddenly started marching right on cue. So Hyram looks at the magic items and knows these bandits are too pathetic to own gear this good. There's definitely a strong magician calling the shots. Everything points back to one person, a mystery magician who specifically wants Lumil dead for some reason. Hyram pins the bandit leader to the ground and demands to know who sent him, while Jorm just hangs out on his shoulder watching the show. The guy screams as Hyram gets rough, but he tries to play dumb and acts like he has no idea what's going on. And Hyram isn't buying the act at all. He grabs the guy's finger and asks again who the magician working behind the scenes is. The bandit loses it from the pain and keeps shouting that he really doesn't know anything. Looks like he might be telling the truth. Jorm looks over at Hyram and asks if he thinks this guy is actually just that clueless talk about a useless lid. Hyram sighs and says it's possible the guy is just a pawn, so they might as well just give up and head toward the town. The bandits are left face down in the dirt, and Jorm asks Hyram if it's really okay to just leave them behind like that. Hyram asks what the big deal is, but Jorm reminds him they're leaving the magic tools right there on the ground, and Hyram says since the summoning tool is still active, whether those guys live or die is really just down to luck. Dude is cold. A massive orc with a huge blade stands right over the terrified bandit leader, and a flock of birds scatters as the guys get wrecked. Moving on, the forest is quiet as Hyram carries the sleeping elf girl through the trees. She looks totally peaceful, but Lumil suddenly snaps awake and realizes he's carrying her, so she quickly hops down and says she can walk on her own. Hyram tells her not to sweat it and asks if she's feeling any better. Gotta make sure she's actually fit to walk. Lumil says she's fine and thanks him for the sword and the jacket, but Hyram just smiles and tells her she can keep them. She totally loses it and says she can't take such valuable-looking stuff. Talk about a major overreaction to a gift. Hyram just smirks and says if she really wants to return the gear, she can just wait until they finally get to town. Lumil thanks Hyram and says she'll take him up on the offer for now, but then she asks what happened to the merchants. Hyram just looks at her and says those guys weren't actually merchants, they were just bandits in disguise. He tells her he left them back at the camp and mentions there were orcs nearby, so they probably got eaten. Lumil can't believe he just left them, but when Hyram asks if she's actually worried about them, she quickly says no. Lumil thinks about how heroes are usually way nicer than this. While Hyram says once they get to town, she can just hire some people to go back for the bandits since the two of them can't carry everyone anyway. Lumil agrees that's true, then mentions her actual job was to get rid of the ancient dragon living on this mountain. Hyram remembers her saying that and smirks. Dude's acting like he could take on a hero and a dragon at the same time. He tells her not to worry about it because he already talked to the dragon and convinced him to leave, and Lumil just stands there looking completely lost, trying to picture him just talking a giant dragon into moving out. Hyram tells Lumil she can just go check the mountain herself once they hit the town. He knows she needs proof for her job, and he suggests she just get someone else to confirm the dragon is gone so it's official. Lumil thinks that's a way better plan. Hyram asks if he can finally ask some questions of his own, and Lumil agrees since she did promise to tell him about this place. She tells him the country they're in is called the Oltville Kingdom, but Hyram looks pretty surprised to hear that name. He asks if that's her family name too, and she admits she's actually the king's daughter, the first princess of the realm. Hyram realizes those bandits from before totally knew who she was, and they specifically set a trap for her because of it. Hyram says he has a million questions now, but he wants to hear the basics about the kingdom first, so Lumil explains the nation was built 100 years ago after the continent was unified by an elven king, and the whole society is ranked by race. Elves are at the top, followed by beastmen and dwarves, while humans are at the bottom. She explains that elves basically treat humans like garbage, so she thinks those bandits just hated her for being royalty. Lumil looks pretty nervous and asks Hyram if he thinks she's a bad person for what her people do. Hyram just stares her down and asks if she specifically has ever oppressed a human before, and Lumil yells that she hasn't done anything like that. But then she trails off and says, "I think," under her breath. Hyram points out she doesn't really sound all that sure about herself. Lumil says being part of the royal family makes her feel responsible for how elves treat others. She admits she knows she should help out, but feels totally useless to change things, so Hyram asks if it's true she hasn't personally bullied anyone. He tells her she just needs to work hard so other people follow her lead. Lumil agrees to try, even though she still feels like she lacks power. Hyram gives her a small smile and says that if that's the case, he has no reason to hate her looks like the guy's a total softie for a pretty face. He explains that elves have bad people just like humans do, and that they're just like those bandits they fought earlier. Lumil looks really relieved to hear that and gives him a big smile while thanking him. And as they keep walking, Hyram asks if there's actually a country for demons around here. He mentions hearing about some demon king ruling a continent far away, and he realizes she didn't even mention demons when she was talking about social ranks before. Lumil explains that there just aren't many demons living in this country at all. We see a huge castle in the distance as Lumil starts to explain how things changed 200 or 300 years ago. Lumil explains there was a massive war between elves and demons back in the day, and even though the demons were way stronger at first, the elves eventually managed to kick them off the continent. The elves call it the Holy War to reclaim their land. Hyram says he gets it while Lumil gets recognized as the princess by some nearby people. As they keep walking toward the city walls, Lumil catches up to Hyram and asks if he has a place to sleep tonight. Hyram says he has no idea since he literally just came down from the mountain, so Lumil invites him to stay at her place. She promises him 3 meals, a bath, and a warm bed, which Hyram thinks sounds pretty sweet. Hyram agrees to the plan, and Lumil tells him she wants to introduce him to someone special. Hyram looks up and calls for Jorm to come down. Turns out he's got a little buddy hiding out. Lumil is totally shocked to see a baby dragon and asks what it is. Hyram tells her it's a young dragon named Jorm, and she thinks the little guy is adorable. She asks if she can pet him, and Hyram tells her it's totally fine. As they reach the gate, someone notices how cute the little dragon is. Jorm makes a tiny noise while the two of them walk into the city. Hyram looks up at the massive walls with Jorm on his shoulder. Lumil smiles and says they'll be at her place in just 5 minutes. The second they step inside, the guards and locals go wild. Everyone starts shouting that the princess is finally back home. The crowd swarms them, telling Lumil they're glad she's safe. They beg her to stop hunting that dragon because it's basically a god. Lumil looks at her people and apologizes for causing so much worry. Meanwhile, the guards keep a close eye on Hyram. She tells everyone to stay calm and explains that Hyram actually convinced the ancient dragon to pack up and leave. The whole crowd starts cheering for the princess and thanking Hyram. He looks pretty surprised by all the love he's getting. Hyram tries to act like it was no big deal, but the locals aren't having it. They tell him saving the princess is the biggest deal ever. 30 minutes pass as the chaos finally starts to die down. Hyram finally manages to ditch the crowd and leans against a wall. He's exhausted and just glad to have some breathing room. Hyram looks out over the city with Jorm on his shoulder. He thinks about how much the people here really love Lumil, but something feels weird to him. He notices that despite the crowd, not a single person from the Night Order came to see her. They keep moving until Lumil points ahead and yells that they've finally arrived. Hyram looks up and sees this massive, fancy mansion. He asks if this is actually her place, and she explains she got it when she became captain. The second they step inside, a whole group of maids is waiting for them. They all cheer and welcome her back home. Lumil shows him around and tells Hyram to just relax and act like the place is his own. Talk about a major upgrade. She looks pretty hyped as she tells Hyram and Jorm that dinner is ready and asks them to come eat. Hyram gives her a quick thanks while Jorm makes a little hungry noise, ready to finally get some real food. The dragon doesn't hold back at all. He dives face first into the plates while Lumil just watches in total shock. Jorm eventually passes out from eating too much. Hyram just chills and thanks the maid for the tea. He's finally getting a break. Lumil looks over and asks Hyram how a human like him got so good at using healing magic, and Hyram takes a sip of his tea while explaining it's mostly just the result of a ton of training and battle experience. He then asks if she's worried about not having magic, which catches her totally off guard as she wonders how he knew. Hyram mentions it's pretty rare to see an elf who breaks their sword but doesn't have any magic to fall back on. The room goes completely silent for a second. Even the dragon is passed out while the vibe gets super heavy, and Lumil's hands start shaking as she grips her cup, finally admitting that he's right and she can't use magic at all. She explains she only became a captain because of royal duty, but her own knights won't even listen to her, and looking totally crushed, she calls herself an embarrassment to the royal family and says everyone calls her the incompetent princess. Hyram realizes that's the real reason she went out to hunt a legendary dragon all by herself. Talk about a rough midlife crisis. Suddenly, Lumiel stands up and calls his name, looking like she's finally ready to ask for some help. Lumiel looks totally desperate as she shouts, begging Hyram to teach her how to use magic, and Hyram looks pretty surprised by the request, asking her why she's even coming to him for help. She admits humans are usually the worst at magic, but his healing was better than anything she's ever seen. Jorm starts panicking and tells him to stop, but Hyram just smiles, thinking about how this girl is a hero. He pets the little dragon to calm him down, honestly finding the whole situation pretty interesting. So he tells her that since she's asking so nicely, he'll be real with her even if it sounds crazy. He explains he's not just some guy, and while he did train a lot, it wasn't in this lifetime. Lumiel just stares at him, completely confused and asking him what he's even talking about, and he finally comes clean, telling her he's a reincarnator who used to be a powerful demon king. He stares her down and asks if she's heard of the legendary demon king Hyram. This guy's really just revealing his whole secret over some tea. Lumiel looks pretty embarrassed and apologizes, admitting she's just ignorant about history, and Hyram tells her it's totally normal not to know, since everything he's talking about happened 500 years ago. He reminds her that he's actually a demon and a demon king at that, asking if she's really okay with who he is. Hyram brings up how she said earlier that there are bad elves and bad humans in the world, so Lumiel reasons that if that's true, there must be good and bad demons as well. This girl's logic is actually pretty solid. She gets all hyped up and realizes that as a demon king, he must be a total expert when it comes to magic, and she tells him he'd be the perfect teacher for her, while Hyram just smiles and asks if she really thinks so. Lumiel grabs her skirt and gives him a formal bow, calling him Hyram-san with a lot of respect, and then she looks him in the eye and asks one more time, seriously begging him to teach her magic. Hyram gives her a confident look and finally agrees, telling her he'll teach her everything he knows. Lumiel is so hyped she calls him master, but Hyram tells her to just call him Hyram because the master title is a bit much, and he thinks to himself that having a human teacher for an elf princess is going to draw way too much attention, so Lumiel argues that he's still her teacher, but eventually gives in and decides that Hyram-san is a good middle ground. She notices how tired he looks from the long trip and suggests he goes to take a bath, which Hyram thinks is a pretty good idea. Outside, a crow flies away from the balcony and travels across the dark sky until it reaches a creepy cave in the mountain. Inside the cave, a demon guy with horns is waiting for the bird, and he's just standing there looking at a glowing stone, and he looks pretty intense while he stares at it, before he suddenly decides to crush the whole thing in his hand like it's nothing. The guy gets this really twisted, scary look on his face while he says Hyram's name. This dude clearly has a major grudge. Suddenly, Hyram has this flash of a memory where someone is yelling for a girl named Sylphie, and it's a total nightmare scene. A giant skeletal monster is grabbing the poor girl while she's screaming her head off. The nightmare is still going. Hyram screams out for Sylphie while that massive bone monster keeps its grip on her, and he suddenly jolts awake in bed, reaching his hand out toward the window like he's trying to grab something that isn't there. He covers his face, sweating and trying to calm down. It was just a dream, while Jorm is still passed out right next to him. Hyram sits on the edge of the bed looking totally beat, but then he looks out the window and sees Lumiel already out there training. He tells Jorm it's time to get up, and while the little dragon groggily wakes up, Hyram thinks about how nice these elven beds are. He laughs to himself, thinking the elves are way better at making beds than the dragons back in the day. Talk about a glow-up. Downstairs, Lumiel wipes the sweat off her face and gives them a big smile, wishing both Hyram and Jorm a good morning. Hyram sits down for breakfast and tells her she's up pretty early. Meanwhile, Jorm is already busy inhaling his food. Lumiel looks super hyped and ready to go, asking him what kind of big plans they have for the day, but Hyram just stares at his bacon with a blank look. He honestly doesn't have any plans at all. Hyram looks up from his breakfast and casually asks Lumiel if she wants him to teach her some magic, and she gets so excited her eyes practically sparkle as she asks if he's actually being serious about it. He gives her a simple yep, and she starts cheering like she just won the lottery. Honestly, she's a total fangirl. Out in the garden, Hyram starts the lesson by explaining that magic is basically split into two simple categories, and he tells Lumiel she's actually been using magic inside her body this whole time, which totally blows her mind. He points out that there's no way she could have fought that orc lord like a boss without some internal magic boost. Lumiel stands there trying to wrap her head around the fact that she's been a magic user all along, while Jorm just rolls around. Hyram explains that people call her a failure only because she can't push magic outside her body, so they need to start with the basics. He tells her to hold out her hands to get started, and she nervously agrees while Jorm just watches from the grass. He instructs her to visualize the energy sitting inside her, and try to channel all that power straight through her arm. Hyram guides her through the process, telling her to focus on moving that energy right into her palms, and it turns out she's actually got a ton of high-quality power. She's honestly not even bad at using it, But since hero magic is way more complicated than the normal stuff, she's going to need a lot more practice with the basics. An hour goes by and the poor girl is completely drained. She's shaking and covered in sweat from the effort. Hyram finally calls it quits for the day, telling her she did a good job while she just collapses on the grass. He hands her a towel and tells her to keep practicing like this every day after she eats. And she looks up at him with a big smile and promises she will. Girl is definitely a hard worker. Hyram looks up at the sky and notices they still have plenty of daylight left, so he suggests they head out and see what the town is like since they're already finished with training. Lumiel's face lights up and she immediately offers to be his personal guide for the trip. Lumiel is super hyped about the trip. She mentions that being a guide is actually something she was specifically trained for, and Hyram worries she'll stand out too much because of her royal status, but she promises she's got a disguise ready. And a little later, Hyram and Jorm are just chilling under a tree. Jorm looks pretty bored waiting for her to finish up. Lumiel finally calls out to them and apologizes for taking so long, so the two of them look up to see her. And she shows up wearing a full-on beastman outfit with a big fluffy tail and matching fox ears. Hyram asks if that's actually supposed to be her disguise, and she confidently says nobody will ever recognize her like this, though Jorm thinks it's pretty obvious. She realizes one more thing and tells them to just call her Lumi while they're out so she doesn't get busted, which Hyram agrees to, even though he's pretty sure her name is the last thing that's going to get her caught since she's wearing a tail in public. They finally make it into the city and it's honestly a pretty nice place. Everything looks super clean and the buildings are fancy, so as they walk through the market, someone immediately shouts princess, and Hyram has to tell them to pipe down. Her secret identity is already a disaster. Hyram looks around and says the elven city is really nice, noting they must be in the rich part of town, and Lumi gets a bit quiet and tells him it's not exactly what he thinks. Then she starts walking away, leaving him totally confused. The two of them head through a large gate that leads away from the fancy buildings and into a much older part of the city. They end up in the slums where things are pretty run down, but a group of local kids spots them and starts cheering for Lumi. Lumi pulls out some food she brought and asks the kids if they've been doing all right. She's basically the neighborhood hero at this point. The kids are super hyped and call her Lumini while they start eating the snacks she gave them. Honestly, she's better at this than her princess job. Hyram watches them and starts to get a bad feeling when he notices most of the kids are covered in bruises and bandages. He kneels down to a kid with his arm in a sling and asks if he's okay, then offers to fix him up with some magic. Hyram puts his hand out and casts a healing spell, and the kid watches in total shock as his injury starts to vanish. The kids think it's the coolest thing ever and ask if Hyram is some kind of pro healer. They've clearly never seen magic like this before. Hyram looks down at one of the kids while Eru watches from the sidelines, losing it over how cute everything is, and she remembers back to her past life, running up to the original demon lord while holding a tiny baby dragon. She tells him that the Dragon King's kid is the most adorable thing ever, even with the giant dragon right behind her. Back in the present, Hyram just gives a warm smile and reaches out to pat the kid's head, and when the kids ask if the little guy is just a lizard with wings, Hyram tells them his name is Jorm. The kids are totally blown away as Jorm starts flying around. Honestly, he's a bigger hit with them than Hyram is. Watching him interact with the group, Lumi can't help but think about how surprisingly kind he is to children. Hyram takes a bite of his bread and asks if she really thinks so, and she just gives him a quick nod. He looks over at the kids and says they remind him of Sylphie, which makes Lumi ask who that actually is. Hyram explains she was the girl he raised like a daughter in his past life. She was only 10 when he died. Lumi looks pretty concerned and says the whole situation sounds really worrisome, and Hyram points out it's been 500 years. But he knows Sylphie is still out there because of a magic tool. He's sure she's gotten way stronger. He admits he just wants to see her one more time, and Lumi watches him with a soft look on her face. Suddenly, a woman from the village walks up and thanks Lumi for the help she gave them earlier today. Lumi asks how her husband is doing, and the woman says he's feeling a lot better now thanks to her. An old guy starts pestering Lumi to listen to his story, but she feels bad since she's supposed to be showing Hyram around town. Honestly, she's too nice for her own good. Hyram tells her not to sweat it since he's learning about the town just by watching her, so he tells her to go ahead and listen. As Lumi gets swamped by the crowd, Jorm flies over to Hyram and addresses him as Your Majesty while they watch from a distance. Jorm notes that Lumi spends all her time listening to everyone's problem, but he wonders if she even has the power to fix them, and Hyram says it's impossible to solve everything, making Jorm wonder if all those people are just going to end up disappointed in her. The old villagers tell Hyram how Lumi is a total saint for listening to people like them who the lords just ignore, and Hyram asks if he can get some quick info from them, and the old guys tell him he can ask whatever he wants. He asks what kind of person the princess really is, so the old men start to explain her character. A girl joins in and says Lumi visits all the poorest parts of town to listen to everyone's problems without ever judging them. And she mentions that Lumi even takes their complaints directly to the feudal lords to try and fix things. The old man says they can't talk to the lords themselves or they'd just get locked up. So Hyram asks what's up with those guys. Turns out the lords are just corrupt former officers who bribed the prime minister for their jobs, so they're basically useless. And the old man confirms Hyram's name before getting really serious about the situation. They beg Hyram to use his strength to help Lumi since that shady prime minister is targeting her, and she's in a lot of trouble. Hyram looks pretty locked in now and tells the old guys to give him every single detail about the trouble she's in. The narrator explains how the Prime Minister's daughter married the king and gave birth to the first prince, and it turns out the Prime Minister is totally obsessed with making sure that first prince becomes the next king. Sounds like a typical power grab. Because the princess is so popular with the regular citizens and other races, the Prime Minister sees her as a massive problem for his plans, so he's been using his influence to mess with the Night Order and chip away at her power, which is why she was forced to move out here. His faction has basically seized all the power in the royal palace, leaving the king to sit there like a puppet while they run the show. Hyram processes all this and realizes that Lumil is completely isolated without a single ally in the palace or the knights, but despite the pressure, she still smiles and does her best for the town, and everyone living there is incredibly grateful for her. The village elders bow down and beg Hyram to use his strength to help her out since she's basically on her own. Hyram gets a confident look on his face and tells the old guys he's got it. He promises to do whatever he can to help. The old man thanks him while they shake on it, relieved that the princess finally has someone she can actually count on. The next day arrives, and Hyram meets up with Lumil and the little dragon out in the field. It's time for some serious training. Lumil pushes herself to the limit, focusing all her energy into her palms. Hyram thinks her growth is way beyond any normal hero, so he tells her she's done enough for now. As the maid brings over some drinks, Lumil says thanks while Jorm starts chugging his water like he's parched. The little guy starts eating and shouts about how good it is, dude's acting like he's never eaten before. Jorm lets out a few dragon noises, and a shocked Lumil asks if the little dragon can actually talk, so Hyram finally comes clean. He tells her Jorm is the ancient dragon she wanted to fight, but he kept it quiet for the citizens' sake. Lumil looks stunned and asks if this tiny creature is really that same legendary dragon. Hyram confirms it, saying that despite his past, he really hopes the two of them can find a way to get along. Lumil smiles and gives Yom a happy pat, telling the little guy that they're definitely going to be friends. Yom lets Lumil give him some head pats. He's acting all casual about it, but he's definitely enjoying the attention. Once Lumil heads out, Hyram tells the little dragon it's time for them to check out the town, and as they walk through the streets, they notice a crowd of people gathered around something. Hyram stops to see what's up, and he finds a little beastman kid who looks like he's in rough shape. Hyram asks him what happened, and the kid is on the ground crying. He says he just wanted to get a message to the princess, but the guards won't let him. The knights start trash-talking the kid's race and tell him to get lost, so Hyram steps in and levels one with a kick. The knight gets smashed straight into a wall, and Hyram looks back to check if the kid is doing okay. The kid is super impressed by how strong he is, but Hyram just says the guards were weak dudes humble like that. He asks for the full story, and the kid explains that the road is totally blocked, leaving everyone stuck with monsters. And to make things worse, the monsters are already on the bridge. They're slowly starting to creep into the town. Hyram tells the kid he's seen enough and to lead the way to the gate, so the kid says he's on it, and they start sprinting through the streets. The kid yells that it's this way while Yom flies over them to keep an eye on things. Meanwhile, a massive tattooed monster is already in the city. It's smashing houses like they're nothing, and the people stuck outside the inner gate are losing it. A woman holds her kids tight while everyone screams for help, but the gate stays shut. People beg the guards to let them in before they get eaten, but the guard just says they can't let the monsters in too. The elf feudal lord shows up and tells them the gate stays closed. He even says it doesn't matter if kids die since humans just breed more later. The people outside are completely shocked. They can't believe their own leader is saying something so messed up while they're about to die. The elf lord just starts laughing in their faces. He tells them humans are basically trash and don't have any worth compared to an elf like him. Suddenly, his guards get sent flying everywhere. Out of the smoke, Hyram calls out to the lord. He's definitely not happy with what he's hearing. Hyram stands over the fallen knights and tells the elf that if he doesn't want to protect his people, he should probably just quit being a lord. Hyram looks the guy right in the eye and tells the elf lord he should really learn a thing or two from Lumil. The knights lose it, yelling about how an inferior human dares to talk to their lord like that before they all charge in to kill him. Hyram doesn't even break a sweat. He just spins through them and sends the whole squad flying back like they're nothing, and he starts walking away to deal with the real problem. The elf lord is fuming in the back, screaming about Hyram mocking their pure blood. The lord raises his staff and charges up a massive blast, screaming that he's going to make sure Hyram dies right here. He lets the magic fly and yells for him to perish honestly. This guy is doing way too much for someone who can't even hit his target. The explosion levels the street, but Hyram just keeps walking through the smoke without even looking back. Suddenly, a giant rotting dragon crashes down from the sky. It smashes into the buildings and sends debris everywhere, and Hyram realizes it's an adult zombie dragon. Iru can't believe what she's seeing and asks if that thing is really a zombie. Hyram explains that these are just dragon corpses with their souls forced back in, basically a massive, mindless undead dragon. Hyram looks at the small dragon and asks if he knows this guy. But Jorm says there is no way he's friends with a zombie, and Hyram turns to the elf and asks if she's got this. Lumiel says she can handle it, so she pulls her sword and tells them to leave it to her honestly. She's way too hyped for a girl fighting a giant corpse. The zombie dragon stands up in the middle of the wreckage and lets out a roar that shakes the entire town. Hyram tells the kids to stay behind him because it's too dangerous, while Iru calls out to him to be careful. Lumiel moves like a flash, landing a quick strike on the beast before barely jumping out of the way of its massive claws, and she starts running up the side of the ruins to get a better angle, looking the monster right in its dead eyes. The Beastmen kids are watching the whole thing in total shock, screaming out for the princess as she takes on the beast. The dragon lunges forward to bite her, but Lumiel flies through the air with her sword glowing bright, and she lands a heavy hit right on its neck, letting off a blast of light that tears through the monster's scales. The zombie dragon lets out a massive stream of fire, but Hyram notices Lumiel is actually blocking the whole blast with her sword, and she doesn't back down even an inch. It's like the dragon's fire isn't even touching her, which is pretty wild considering she just shreds through its thick scales like they're made of paper. That's the power of a hero making a dragon look like a joke. Hyram just watches from the side, thinking about how heroes are the natural enemy of dragons and how he has nothing left to do honestly. He's kind of salty about it. But then the dragon catches her off guard and sends her flying with its tail, making the kids scream out for the princess as the monster stands over the ruins. The dragon shifts its focus and aims a blast right at the children, while Lumiel screams at them to stay back as she tries to recover, and the beast lets out a huge explosion of fire that completely swallows up the spot where the group is standing. Suddenly, a giant magic circle glows bright through the center of the flames, acting as a shield against the heat, and Lumiel watches in total shock, because there is no way anyone should have survived that direct hit from the dragon's breath. Iru calls out Hyram's name as he stands there perfectly fine, holding up a massive barrier that keeps all the kids safe from the fire. The zombie dragon tries to crush them under its massive weight, but Hyram just stands there holding up its foot like it's nothing, and he yells for Lumiel to go for it. She shouts back that she's on it, jumping into the air to end this fight right now while she flies straight toward the monster's open mouth. She looks completely focused as she prepares to land the killing blow, and with one final massive swing, she rips right through the dragon's neck. The scales shatter everywhere as she cuts the whole head clean off. Lumiel lands and leans on her sword, looking totally drained from the fight. She's breathing hard and can barely stand, but she whispers a quick thank you, probably to the gods or maybe to Hyram for that opening he gave her, and she stands there alone in the dirt, looking at the massive decapitated head of the beast she just put down. She looks pretty sad about the whole thing as she tells the dragon it can finally rest in peace. Talk about a softie, but Hyram walks up with the little dragon Jorm and tells her she's actually got some serious skill. She's definitely surprised by the compliment, so she gives him a big, genuine smile and thanks him for the help. It looks like they finally managed to win this one together. All the Beastmen kids crowd around Lumiel and give her a huge thanks for saving them. She's basically their hero now, and one of the kids turns to thank Hyram too, but he just tells the little guy not to worry about it and to keep thanking the princess instead. The village women rush over to check if everyone is okay, and the kids all cheer that they're fine while asking Lumiel if she's hurt. Lumiel looks genuinely happy hanging out with everyone, but Hyram is standing back with a really serious look on his face because he's starting to realize that the undead dragon showing up wasn't an accident. It was a targeted trap meant to kill the princess, and it hits him that the girl is basically out here fighting all by herself. He looks over at the ruined buildings and figures out the enemy's plan. They knew she'd go after the orc lord, so they dropped a zombie dragon on her to finish the job. Hyram walks over to the elf feudal lord who's hiding in the wreckage. The guy looks like he's seen a ghost, and the lord is just clutching his head and making weird, creepy noises. He's completely lost his mind from the stress of it all. Jorm says the guy is totally insane now, but Hyram thinks the whole thing feels a little too convenient to be real. Dude is definitely hiding something. The feudal lord is losing it, but Hyram notices something is off. It turns out there's a hidden curse on the guy, and Jorm wonders why anyone would bother cursing such a loser. Hyram thinks it was done to keep the guy quiet, but the real problem is that the spell looks like it was cast by a demon. A dark spirit hangs over the Lord, and Hyram decides they're done here since the guy is useless now. He tells Yom it's time to head out and they spend the night in the village. By the time the next morning rolls around, things take a weird turn. Lumil comes running up holding a fancy sealed envelope. She's super hyped and yells for Hyram to check this out because it's an official invite from her dad. She says the king wants Hyram to come to the imperial capital right away. Hyram is totally caught off guard by the news. He asks what the king would even want with him, so Lumil explains that her dad wants to reward him for his help. Hyram thinks he's being humble, but really he just doesn't want the attention. He says it's way too fast since the dragon attack just happened yesterday, but Lumil reminds him they have magic communication for a reason. Hyram stays quiet for a second, thinking about how weirdly fast this invitation showed up. He figures there's definitely something going on behind the scenes, and he tells Lumil he doesn't mind going, but he has one condition. He looks right at her and says she has to come with him to the capital because deep down he's worried that something might happen to her if he leaves her behind. Dude is basically her bodyguard now, and Lumil gets all excited and tells him not to worry. She says her job was already to show him around anyway, so Hyram finally agrees to go. She runs off to get her stuff ready while Hyram sits back at the table. He tells her he's counting on her to lead the way, and while he's fixing his tea, Yom asks if he's really okay with this. The little dragon is worried about all the bad guys they might run into, but Hyram just sips his drink like it's nothing. He starts thinking about all the stuff they've dealt with lately, like those bandits and the Orc Lord, and even that crazy zombie dragon. He's pretty sure the Prime Minister is setting traps for them, but he doesn't seem stressed at all. He sets his cup down and thinks to himself that whoever is behind this will make a move soon. Honestly, he's actually kind of excited to see what they try next. The carriage is packed and ready to go, so Hyram calls out to Yom that it's time to move. They head out toward the capital to see what kind of trouble is waiting. Hyram looks pretty confident as they start their trip, and he tells Yom that their next stop is the capital. The little dragon is totally hyped for the journey and says he's really looking forward to seeing the city. Far away in a dark, jagged castle, dragons circle the sky under a bright moon. Things look way more intense here, and inside the throne room, a woman with a sharp smile tells her messenger to repeat what he just said. The messenger confirms the news, saying Hyram has definitely been reborn as a human, which leaves the other demons in total disbelief. And one of the guards bows low and tells Demon Lord Elimgard that the report is definitely true. A demon girl nearby can't believe he's a human now. She knows that kind of magic is hard even for someone like him. Another guy points out that there are probably people out there who are actually glad the old boss is back, but Elimgard just leans back on her throne and agrees. Seems like she's not worried about his fan club. Dude's got a target on his back, and she ends the meeting with a cold plan. She says they should just find him and kill him first. One of the demons with glasses bows down low and asks Queen Elimgard to let him handle the hit on Hyram. He points out that the kingdom of Oltville is his territory anyway, so he's the best guy for the job, and the queen looks pretty satisfied with that. She tells him fine, the mission is officially all his. The guy bows again and thanks her for the opportunity. He's clearly taking this hit personally. She gives the final cold order to kill Hyram and bring back his head, and the demon says he understands. As he walks away through the dark halls, he thinks about how his old boss has actually come back, but he can't wrap his head around why he'd choose to be a human. He gets so mad he just smashes a stone pillar. He says a weak version of Hyram isn't really Hyram at all, so he's definitely not holding back. Dude's taking his job way too seriously. Suddenly, a bright flash of light cuts right into the ground near the woods. Looks like the attack is starting. Meanwhile, the campsite is totally quiet as everyone sleeps by the fire, not knowing what's coming for them. Lumil sits up in her sleeping bag near the carriage. She's wide awake, and meanwhile, Hyram is standing out in the dark, using his powers to control a floating orb of light. The light fades into his hand as he clenches his fist, but he suddenly looks over like he's been caught. Hyram asks Lumil if the noise woke her up, but she says she was already up and asks about the light, so he shows her his necklace and explains he was searching for Filfi. Lumil gets all excited and asks if he found her. Hyram looks pretty disappointed as he admits it's not going to be that easy to track her down. Searching for a needle in a haystack would probably be faster. Lumil tells him not to get discouraged and promises she'll do whatever she can to help him find her. He thanks her for the support and tells her to get some rest since they'll be at the capital by morning. Hyram heads back to his bedroll and gives her a final good night. Dude's definitely exhausted. Lumil wishes him a good night too as the fire dies down and the mountains go completely silent. The next day arrives and the group finally makes it to the capital, where Yom looks out the window, completely amazed by the huge buildings as their carriage rolls through the busy streets of the city. Lumil speaks up and tells Hyram and Yom that she actually has a younger sister who lives here, and she asks if they'd mind if she went to visit her. Hyram just smiles and says he doesn't mind at all. Lumiel thanks him and says her sister will be so happy to see her as the carriage keeps moving. They eventually pull up to a massive, fancy mansion that looks way too big for just one person. Hyram asks if this is her family estate, but she explains it's just a royal villa where her sister stays. He asks why she doesn't just live at the palace, and Lumiel says it's because she's sick and needs to rest. Hyram looks around at all the people working in the halls and notices something about the servants. He remarks that the staff looks incredibly high level, and Lumiel mentions they were all hand-picked from the palace. Hyram asks if all these high-level servants are actually soldiers, but Lumiel just smiles and says no way. Only the mansion guards have actually had any real combat training. They finally reach the end of the hallway where Lumiel announces they've made it to Siren's room. And as they walk in, the little girl in the bed can't believe her eyes. She yells out for her big sister, and Lumiel gives her a huge hug. Siren starts coughing a bit while she cries, telling Lumiel how happy she is that she made it back home safely. Lumiel tells her she's happy to see her too, and she's just glad her little sister is looking a bit better today. But while they're hugging, Siren finally notices the random guy standing in the back and asks who he is. Lumiel introduces Hyram and the little dragon to her sister, Siren Ortville, and Siren acts totally polite. She says it's nice to meet them and even thanks them for looking after her sister, though she's still coughing. She looks up at the little creature flying around and asks if Jorm is actually a dragon, so Hyram brags about him being a legendary ancient dragon. Siren is basically starstruck, saying it's like meeting someone straight out of a fairy tale. Jorm asks the kid if she's not scared of him, and Siren is just shocked that the little dragon can actually talk. Jorm starts bragging about how he's a big deal even for an ancient dragon, but Siren just thinks he seems like a nice guy. The dragon acts all tough and says he'll let her pet him, and Siren gets super excited because she's always wanted to. She sits there and gently pets him while he hangs out in her lap. After a bit, Siren looks up at Hyram and asks how he and her big sister even met in the first place, so Lumiel explains that Hyram saved her from a bunch of bandits and monsters. Siren is totally losing it and begs for the whole story. Lumiel keeps going and mentions the part where she fought an orc lord while Hyram just stands back and lets them talk. Eventually, Siren falls asleep, and Lumiel mentions how it's been forever since her sister looked this peaceful. Hyram tells her that's a good sign, and she'll probably feel way better after she gets some actual rest. But Lumiel gets a serious look on her face. She reminds him that the doctor said this isn't something that can be cured that easily.